Hello! I have come to the conclusion that there is no easy way to talk about this. I've tried filming this video probably tens of times over the last few years, and I just filmed a video last night actually, and it wound up being an hour and a half long, and I didn't even get to the meat and potatoes of what my experience at the troubled teen institution actually was like. So I'm gonna do my best in this video to just make an as succinct as possible story about what I went through. And keep in mind that I am one of, I don't even know how many other people who go through the same horrible things. I hope that my voice can represent people who are being silenced, or people who are too afraid to speak up, or people who are legally, threatened if they speak up. It happens, and it's pretty... the way that I see it, kind of, and this is kind of the way that I see corruption in the government as well. I look at people in power who are evil, and I think that they're just a bunch of bullies. And I think that the more people like me who are fortunate enough to be able to tell my story, my own story, these stories, the more we come together and stand together in sovereignty and solidarity and speak about these things, the less power that these evil influences have. Because, turning on a light in a room of dark is the way to eliminate the dark. So I'm excited to be transparent about my story for that reason. And I send all my love and blessings to those who, again, are dealing with this stuff in silence, or who don't feel like they have the support or connections, resources, anything to tell this story. I know how lonely that feels, and for a very long time I felt a lot of pressure carrying this story around by myself, and feeling like the weight of all of it was on me. And I still somewhat kind of feel that way. I don't think I hear enough talk in the world at large about things like this that happen. It's not something that I was educated about in school. It's not something that is like a common trope in books or movies or whatever. I know Netflix recently released a docu-series called The Program. I haven't watched it yet. I have not been in a right place to watch it mentally. I prefer to kind of go that deep by myself, or with, I imagine, my future life partner is probably one of the only people I'm gonna want to, or gonna feel like I would be able to sit in front of a documentary like that with, in the presence of another person, because it's so vulnerable for me. And it's such it's been a very isolating experience, and I kind of, sometimes I feel this sense of being gut punched when I talk about it, and people are too stunned to speak, and it's completely understandable, but that is one thing that's been hard for me. It's where's the support, and I know it's out there. So I want to be a force of support as well. And people have actually sent me some cool resources and things like this that I haven't yet dug too deep into, but it's powerful to know that they're out there, and I will share them as well. So let's jump into the story, okay? My name is Aaliyah. I am 26. I'll be 27 in about a month. I'm filming this on December 22nd, on the solstice. Happy solstice, 2024. It's crazy to think. And my birthday is on January 19th. So, yeah. When I was 16, I was at a point in my life where my emotional needs for validation and empathy and being seen, being heard, feeling emotionally secure, emotionally safe, feeling that sense of warmth, I was at a point at 16 where those things were void in my life. I also dealt with a lot of gaslighting and invalidation and abuse, mainly psychological and emotional, mental, from my mom. And growing up was chaotic. I won't get into too much nitty-gritty yet. One day I will, but not now. That's kind of a snapshot of my young life till 16. I literally went my childhood without a sense of warmth, emotional security, emotional safety from my mother, and as well as my whole family. And maybe you can imagine how that feels. Maybe you can relate, or maybe you are blessed with emotionally available family members and an upbringing that met your emotional needs. But I didn't. I didn't get that. I always had at least one close friend in my childhood, at any given point, and I found a lot of solace and peace in nature and in my art, and I still do to this day. So I kind of, yeah, I've always found a lot of solace and connection to more subtle realms. And today I apply that passion to, using my psychic and intuitive abilities, and also teaching others how to cultivate intuition. It's one of the things that I'm most passionate about. So that's kind of an image of who I was, who I am, and where I was. That led me to then, at 16, when I was in this extremely low place, I had actually called a psych ward because my therapist at the time told me that I should do that because I was suicidal and I would never dare, take my own life. I never wanted to die because sunsets were too beautiful. You know what I mean? I've always been a very sensitive soul, very soft and receptive to beauty and magic and wonder, and that was my lifeline and my anchor and my peace, and I've always had that my whole life. So I never actually wanted to die. I just was exhausted from the lack of support and the cumulative effects of everything that I had went through. So my, at the time, therapist, who, bless him, but he didn't acknowledge really the issues that needed acknowledgement. There was no change. There's no changing a narcissist's behavior. There's no getting them to see what they're doing wrong. So he couldn't help in that sense. And then I got sick of it after a certain amount of time. And when I was 12 or 13 was when I started to realize that, my home life was like perverted. It was messed up. Something was wrong. And when I started to speak up, I would get shut down. I would get gaslit. You know what I mean? So, that therapist suggested that I call psych ward, and I went there for a week, and they, maybe I'll tell that story more another time, but that was kind of one of my first glimpses into the abuses that happen in medical institutions. It didn't help. It didn't do anything for me. We weren't allowed to go outside for more than 30 minutes in an entire week. We were fed classic low-grade hospital food, packaged in plastic, artificial chemicals, dyes, all this crap. Not allowed to touch other people, strict schedules, very sad, gray, like boring bedrooms, timed showers. School was a joke and insulting. It felt like preschool. I felt belittled. It was very dehumanizing. And so that's just to add to this illustration of kind of where I was that led me to seek out an emotional connection with this predator that I met on Omegle, which I don't know if you remember Omegle. I cringe a bit just saying it out loud, but it was a part of culture in like the early 2000s. I don't know when it was like invented, but yeah, going on that chat room was a thing that, you know, my friends and I in middle school would do on a random night when we were hanging out, and we would like laugh about it because, oh my gosh, what a taboo, secret, fun, adventurous thing that we're doing, talking to these random people online, and you never know who you're gonna get in the next chat room or whatever. So at 16, when I was in that state that I was, I typed in the tags astrology and spirituality in the chat section of this chat room. And if you don't know what that is, what all of this is, it's basically a website where you can chat with random people all over the world who are online at the same time as you. You're just matched with someone random. But if you want to talk about specific topics, you can enter in a tag. And if other people online have the same tags as you can, you know, match with them. So I did that, and I was paired with someone who had a, you know, pretty good knowledge of spirituality. And I'm going to try to temper myself. I don't want to get too overloaded with details because I have a tendency to just go on in like hyper detail about all these accounts when there's stories that I can dive into another time. And please ask, like, if you want to hear more information about anything that I'm sharing, I think I'd be more than happy to share, because there is a wealth of detail to all these instances that I want to share, but I just want to keep this concise. So I met this guy, and long story short, he was 32, I was 16. He preyed on my vulnerability and my naivete, and I was practically wrapped around his finger, and he used my horrible relationship with my mom against her and against my relationship with her, and he exploited that, and he, over time and almost successfully, lured me to run away from my home and abduct me and traffic me. That is a very elaborate story that I will save for another time. But him and his family ran a legitimate criminal trafficking ring. My mom, while I was in the troubled teen institution in Utah, spent thousands of dollars on private investigations around this man whose name was Anubis Budrum and his family. And it was confirmed that they were all doing really shady business. There were a lot of overlaps with the things that I experienced and lies that he told me to cover up what he was actually doing. And with the background checks, it was like his, you know, family names were revealed, and pieces of information that I had learned matched up with, you know, his family names and different things that would happen. And there was even a death. It was like a drive-by, a car. This wound up on the news, and my mom and my therapist stupidly allowed me to see it when I was trying to heal in Utah. But basically what I'm trying to say is someone in his family might have murdered somebody. So it was some mafia shit. It was really fucking intense, especially for a 17-year-old to learn who's trying to heal. Yeah, it was absurd. So this man was evil. He almost trafficked me. I'm gonna just leave that story for another video, and again, please ask me questions because there's so many details that I'm trying to hold myself back from going into because I know I'll just talk for forever. So, December 2014, I was 16. That's when we connected online. Between December 2014 and March 2015, he had driven from Miami to Queens, New York, where I was living at the time. He was living in Miami. I'm pretty sure he still is. So he drove to me a couple times, and I did, meet him and see him in person, and he did some terrible, terrible things. And my mom knew that he existed when a couple days after I met him, because I told her I met this person I feel an emotional connection with, and I want to meet him one day. And her immediate reaction was like, "Oh fuck no," which good for her. And then I was like, "Come on, you don't even know him, whatever." She was like, "Okay, I understand. Like, have him take a photo of his driver's license and send it to me, so at least I have that, And I was like, "Okay," so I did that. And the more him and I talked, the more volatile things got between my mom and I. It's just so much. And then in March, I think it was March 5th or 4th or 6th or something. It was the first week of March in 2015. And because my mom had known about it and she knew that I, hated living with her, it was horrible for me. About a week before the first week of March, she had called me in her bedroom and said, "Aaliyah, like, I understand that you feel like you can't live with me. Does this seem like a better alternative?" And she showed me this website for a place called Havenwood Academy in Cedar City, Utah. And it's on the Breaking Code Silence website, so check it out. And if you don't know what Breaking Code Silence is, it's a movement Paris Hilton started against the troubled teen industry, to kind of advocate for, abuse survivors who go through that stuff. And so she showed me this website, and on the website, the impression I got was just like, why the hell are you suggesting to send me to this institution for kids with radical attachment disorder and substance abuse problems and anxiety and depression and etc. Did I say domestic abuse problems? I don't know. I was insulted because, my mom's narcissistic, gaslighting, emotional harm towards me drove me to insanity. I wasn't wrong, but I was scapegoated my whole life for anything. She could never take accountability when it mattered most, and that's the overarching dominant experience that I have in my childhood. Sometimes, like, I can still remember plenty of magic and wonderful things or whatever, but that was a huge part of it that never really leaves, especially when I tell this story. It just floods all over the place. I'm sure, understandably so. So I was offended that she showed me that. Anyway, that was about a week before March, whether it was 4th, 5th, or 6th. I was in my bedroom. I heard a knock on my door. And I said, "Hold on." And then I heard an even louder knock on my door, and I said, "Hold on." And then I heard my mom's shameful laugh muffled behind the door. And I got the sense that there were other people there. And I don't remember whether it was me who opened the door or them who opened the door. But this is the chapter of my story where I was legally kidnapped. Something that most people who are taken to troubled teen institutions go through is this legal kidnapping by people whose job titles are called transporters. And what a transporter is someone who, the guardian of their child, their minor, they sign over their custody temporarily to the transporters so that the transporters are legally allowed to abduct these children from their homes. A lot of the time it happens in the middle of the night. A lot of the time it gets violent. A lot of the time there's injuries and thrashing and like fighting involved. I am peaceful. I did not fight. In fact, the woman looked terrified, and I told her, I don't know what happened. I think she told me that she, in her job, she told me that she had gone through a lot of the, violent situations in the past with these transportation gigs, and I was like, don't worry, I'm not going to do that. But basically, they opened the door and they said, hi, my name's James and my name is Mandy, and we're going to be taking you away today. And they wore blue polo shirts with embroidered logos and khaki pants. And the guy had brown hair and the girl had blonde hair, and she looked terrified. And I was the one kind of reassuring her in that situation. I look back at some of these moments and I think how ironic it is and how funny it is that this wasn't even the only situation where I was going through this whole thing in my life, this crazy devilish story arc with the trafficking and the institution and the whatever else. Like, that wasn't the only time that I had to, comfort someone else who was putting me in a vulnerable position. And I think as a victim of emotional, psychological abuse, I'm kind of used to that. I'm pretty good at it, which is sad and very unjust. And again, I know I'm not the only person who, goes through that. So my heart goes out to everyone else who lived so many cataclysmic moments in their life where they were invisible yet again, even though they were the ones being abused and victimized and things like this. So, yeah. Anyway, I packed a suitcase full of things that they told me to put in there. I didn't know where I was going. Once my suitcase was packed, they each stood on either side of me, and they were holding my arms behind my back like I was a criminal, and it was a walk of shame. They walked me down the staircase. They put me in their car. I was so self-conscious because I was sure that there were neighbors or people in cars on the streets passing by who could see me. I lived in a duplex in Far Rockaway in Queens, so it was kind of a busy place, a public place, and the perfect place for a young gal to feel humiliated if anyone were to see what was happening, because I'm not a criminal, and I didn't do anything criminal. My neighbors are being kind of loud. Sorry, that's kind of distracting for me. Anyway, got in the car, and then they told me, you have two options. You can either choose to drive. It's going to take 3 days, but we're driving nonstop. Or we can fly, but we're going to get there at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning. So I said, let's fly. And because of that information that they gave me, the distance, I figured, it was probably Havenwood Academy that I'm going to, this website that my mom had showed me to, and they confirmed that it was Utah. And in that moment I felt so betrayed by my mom, because I had been disgusted. I had said no to the idea of going to this place that wasn't even for me. But she sent me there. And she did send me there to protect me from this guy who was trafficking me. That was her intent. But I'm sorry to say, she basically failed at meeting my needs emotionally. So, yeah. That kind of thing is to be expected. I felt very betrayed, and that was not the first time I felt betrayed, but it was something very real that I went through and I carried alone. no one really saw, no one was really ever there for me to defend me or protect me. And this part's making me emotional because the severity of feeling dehumanized that I went through is too much. You know, it's too much for any person to go through. And I think about all the other people who are currently institutionalized, and I think of, because of what I've suffered with, one of my most important values is kindness, because I don't care if someone is abusive or a bully. I don't want to spit that back. And I have before. Like, I have lashed out because abusive situations, particularly my upbringing, you know, drove me to lash out and react in ways that are valid. I was literally driven crazy. But yeah, going through stuff like that as like a teenager and an adolescent is so disorienting. It's confusing, it's absurd, and it's comical. Like, it's so absurd to the point where it's funny. And it's like, it's really disassociating, because I lived through some of the most, like, dehumanizing. I mean, abuse is dehumanizing, you know? Humans are created, in my faith, in my belief, in the image of God. Like, we are all pure light souls. And in my religious background, I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish. We were never very orthodox, or, you know, I always had a good relationship with religion, and I love mysticism. And in Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, or which, you know, the core of Judaism, the magic, fantastical wisdom, yeah, at the core of the religion, there's something called the evil inclination. And the evil inclination is a part of nature. It's nature. It's not fundamentally wrong, but it is nature. And the thing about the evil inclination, when it's managed in ways that are not appropriate for society, is that it creates more suffering and more pain. And I was subject to, between my upbringing, the hospitalization, even being in school was terrible for me. And going to this institution and plenty of other things, you know. I had like a front row seat to what kinds of horrible things happen when the evil inclination is not properly channeled. And I was subject to a lot of it. So I got a ton of insight from those experiences, and I genuinely believe that, you know, evil is nature. It's nature. Killing is nature. Fighting is nature. If we look at wildlife and animals, I mean, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. And this might be controversial or sensitive for some, but I think most people can agree that, you know, darkness is part of nature. And now, with the understanding of the evil inclination from a Kabbalistic perspective, it's expressed that people who are suspected to have maybe more evil inclination than most, the solution for those people is to give them a job that will protect themselves and their society from harm. And, you know, giving them a job like a butcher, for example, you know, or a hunter, so they have a place to actually channel that energy in a way that's productive and not destructive. That's my faith, that's my belief, and I, you know, will carry compassion with me at my core, no matter what happens to me. no matter how evil people get, no matter, so yeah, that was kind of a tangent, but anyway, rewinding. I chose to fly when they asked if I wanted to fly or drive. And when I was in the airport, this was really surreal for me. I actually saw my friend's mom, and she was on the same flight as I was, and I was too shocked and self-conscious and afraid to say anything to her. Victims of abuse are usually afraid to speak up and express themselves because anything that they do will be used against them, or used as a weapon to exploit them even more. So me being vulnerable meant me being even more vulnerable, me being, even more of a victim. So I said hi to her, and I felt this profound sense of dissonance inside of myself, like she was the last semblance of familiarity that I had in that moment in my life. It just turned upside down in a second. So we got on the flight. The stars were beautiful in the sky from the plane, and we landed in Las Vegas, and we got in a car and we drove 3 hours in the red desert at night, no ambient light. At one point, the transporters they were like nice people, by the way. Like, they weren't like egotistical or whatever. I mean, they were like kind and like friendly, and I think they were trying to make me feel comfortable. They weren't mean or anything, but they did say, like, when we were driving, Area 51 is like over those mountains over there, and I was like, I didn't need this alien fact in my awareness when what I'm going through already feels so cataclysmic. So again, that kind of added to the irony and the surrealism. It was so surreal, the surrealism of all of this. So I got to the house. We were in this neighborhood, and they pulled up by this house, and then this couple walked out, and you know how the eyes are the window to the soul. You can kind of look in someone's eyes and you can tell if they have demons in there, if they're full of love, or if they're mean or afraid or judging you or whatever. Like, you can tell everything from a person's eyes. These people had eyes that I'd never seen before. They were gray and soulless, void of soul. And it hi, honey. Yeah, it was jarring. Hold on, I need to pause this for a second. So yeah, we got to the house, and gotta pause this again, I'm so sorry. Okay, so we went inside, and the transporters left, and it was about like 2 or 3 in the morning, I think, and again, this was in early March. And the alarm went off, and I see 15 girls run down the spiral staircase and gather in the living room. And they were all wrapped in blankets, and they just felt kind of off to me. And I felt like I was in a mental institution, and it was very bizarre and weird and unsettling, extremely unsettling. And then one of the girls counted 1, and then following, they counted off 2, 3, 4 until 15 of them counted themselves off, and they went upstairs. And then when I got there, I was introduced to my support staff or whatever. There was some young 20-something staff on shift, and they were all wearing like matching uniforms or whatever, and some of the girls just looked like doe-eyed and like young and whatever, and they had to do my intake. So they took me into this bathroom / laundry room behind the desk, and this girl who was a staff, and she was the one with the huge eyes, so she wasn't really threatening at all, thankfully. I think if she looked any more threatening. It would have been a worse experience for me, but she asked me to strip naked, and do a strip search and do a squat and cough search, which is what drug smugglers do, not people like me. So I was not about to do that without, trying to, like, get proof that she was legally allowed to do that. But she didn't have any papers or anything. She didn't have anything she'd show me, and she threatened me. She was terrified, mind you, while she threatened me, but she was like, if you don't do this, we're gonna have to take off your clothes for you and restrain you. And I felt pity for her. I felt like another example of the victim feeling bad for for these people. Which is crazy, but I didn't want to be pinned down and stripped naked, so I did it. I took my clothes off and I did the squat and cough. And then I was given a bin of clothing to sift through and find an outfit that fit me. So I looked through the clothes and I looked they were all little girls' clothes. And I'm like a tall 5'7", 16-year-old. I think I'm like closer to 5'8" now. People ask me if I'm 5'8" all the time, and like last I got measured, like clinically I was like 5'7" and some inches or whatever, but I could be 5'8", whatever. I'm tall for a woman. And I was tall then, and all of these clothes were, like I said, little girl clothes. So it was humiliating and extremely uncomfortable trying to find an outfit that fit me. But I found these fuzzy zebra pants that barely fit around my hips, and this shirt that just covered the length of my torso. And they confiscated my luggage for 3 days, and I wore that outfit for 3 days without knowing where I was, without knowing anything that was going on. If my mind jumps around, I apologize, but I'm just going to flow with it. Within the first couple of days of me getting there, I was introduced to my therapist. And I remember feeling, again, humiliated and belittled in her chair in front of her. She almost judged me. Basically, she was judgmental towards me for not being more emotional or for not being more vulnerable. She kind of came at me with a passive aggressive, I don't even know how to even put this into words. She was almost using her power over me to crack me. It was like energetically she was like, I'm the boss and I'm dancing around you and I see how much pain you're in on the inside and I'm gonna win and I'm gonna get it out of you. And it was after, I don't know if it was a session or two or a couple hours, that I finally cried when I was talking to her, and she was like, that's it. And that feeling of being like emotionally dominated by a therapist felt so humiliating to me. And in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that her intention was to humiliate me. But the fact was that I was coming from a horrible place, and the way that she approached me was not the kind of care that I needed by any means in the beginning. Later, things felt relatively fine with her, although she was not a good therapist for me. Yeah, I can get into more of that as I tell the story. So anyway, in the 3 days that my luggage was confiscated, they had put all of my stuff in the washing machine, and they ruined some of my clothes, because they washed them on like high heat or something, and they shrunk, and the material kind of changed, and it was just another minor offense, like, of just how little control I had and how this one small thing that brought me comfort, which was my favorite sweater, and the texture of it, like, that was out of my control. Yeah, and this is one small example of how I just felt so violated. I felt so violated over and over and over at that place, and not only there, but like in life, you know. One thing, so I took some notes, and I'm definitely going to be jumping out of order, and again, please ask me questions. I want to share more details. I want to tell you everything that happened at this fucked up institution, so that you can fight the fight with me, and we can, burn these places to the ground, metaphorically. Yeah. So, one of the things that happened was they had this binder full of the names of the girls who went there. By the way, this was a home where there were a home. It was not a home. It was a prison, more like it. And it was a cult as well, because we were stripped of our sense of identity. We were our own personal power and sovereignty was basically used against us. If we were our own people, we would get hurt. If we were natural, if we did what we want, if we stepped into a room without asking for permission to step into a room, we would get physically restrained. We would get our basic freedoms taken away from us. It was literally a prison and a cult. We had to ask for permission to cross over the threshold of one room to the other, the living room to the dining room to the bedrooms. We were never allowed to be alone. If we were talking, we always had to have a staff listening, unless we had what was called a safe buddy, and it was kind of like an emotional support thing. If you wanted to talk alone with one of your peers, you had to be given that privilege. It was a privilege. Privacy was a privilege. Privacy was something that you earned. That was literally held against you. There were no doors on the bedrooms. Did I say that the house had 16 girls in it? They were all aged 12 to 17. And the legal adult age is 18. So because I was 17 when I went there, I only stayed for 10 months. I was there March until December. But there was a girl there who was sent there when she was 12, and she got out when she was like 14. So she spent about 2 years there. There was another girl who was there for 2 years as well. Who actually happened to be wearing one random day one of my shirts that was confiscated from me and put in this place called Contraband. And I don't even know what the event was, but like I think because she lived there for so long, they gave her like special privileges to like go up in Contraband and like thrift, like look for what you like or whatever. And she found a shirt that was mine, and I saw her wearing it, and I was like, where did you get that from? That's my shirt. And she was like, they just gave it to me. And I was like, no, that's my shirt that they stole from me. They took it away. That was another thing that was consistently unfair, which was the dress code. We had to wear loose clothing, and we had to cover like above our knees and our shoulders, and we couldn't wear anything like form-fitting or, tank tops or whatever. But for some reason, some girls got away with it. I don't understand that part. But for some reason, it was not enforced. There were lots of bullshit rules that were held over us, and we were treated as if their regimens were like one size fits all kind of things. Like, for example, with the food, I actually gained 15 pounds when I lived there, and I developed IBS that took me about 3 years to mostly heal from, because the shit that they fed us was mostly processed and beige. Lots of frozen, pre-baked Costco rolls, like bread rolls. I can't even remember what they fed us. Lots of sugary, starchy, pancakey breakfast things. Lots of like white bread, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I am into Ayurveda, and there's something called food combining. And for more sensitive constitutions like me, it's important to eat foods in combinations that are settling and kind to the digestive system. But combining things like processed white bread and sugary jelly and nut butter and like raw vegetable sticks. I know that's like a classic American school kid lunch or whatever, but it's a recipe for inflammation. And everything that they served us was a recipe for inflammation. There was no organic, there was no fresh. It was all terrible, terrible food. It was not even real food. So, yeah, what they would do was, once we were done eating, they would look at the mess on our plates. And from a scale of 0 to 100%, whatever random 19, 20-something-year-old staff was on shift with zero nutritional background training would write a percentage of what we ate. And even if someone ate more than someone else, but their plate looked fuller or more full of texture or messier, they would get a lower percentage or a higher percentage. And it was all, there was zero objectivity. And they basically were manipulating the way that we ate. They would try to control how much we ate or how little we ate. And, with these bullshit scales, because if we didn't get a certain percentage, we weren't allowed to fucking exercise. And if we were caught doing crunches or push-ups in the room, we would be punished for it, or we would be stopped. Again, like going outside, breathing air, being a human animal creature of the earth was a privilege in this prison. We had to earn it. It was taken away from us. It was held over our heads. Okay, that was one thing. I was also a good student. I was good as in I completed the work successfully, and I didn't have any cognitive trouble with, the stuff that we were learning. But there was like 1 week where I, was slower to finish work, and I wasn't allowed to go outside. I wasn't allowed to set foot outside. Like some people, everyone processes and learns at a different pace, but we were just put in this mold of, if you don't produce and show up to this literally impossible, irrational, inconsistent standard, then we are going to dehumanize you. Okay. I also witnessed them restrain this girl who, she was there when she was 12. I think she was 13 years old. This part is a little graphic if you're extra sensitive, so skip forward 3 minutes if you don't want to hear about it. 2 minutes. But this girl was sent there for radical attachment disorder because she was sent around from orphanages from when she was a baby to 5 years old, and that will do a number on a kid's development. And God bless her, I loved her so much. But she was having a kind of triggered moment, and staff physically abused her. They punished her, and they restrained her, and they picked her up by her hand. They literally took her hand like this and lifted her up so her entire body weight was hanging on this cinched wrist, her 2 wrists. And that was nauseating. I believe the staff that was on shift who did it was a 25-year-old boy. A 25-year-old fucking boy. Who didn't think he was doing anything wrong. And she wasn't hurting anyone. They just didn't know how to handle shit like that. You know what I mean? This was not a rehab facility. It was a prison where you were dehumanized. Your rights were taken away from you. Everything. They were held over your head. And if you didn't do what you were forced to do, then you would get abused. You would get bullied, which was just complete bullshit. So I mostly kind of kept to myself, and I didn't really cause drama, and somehow I made it through. I'm looking at my notes here to see. Yeah, there was no privacy. I mentioned there was no doors on the bedrooms. There was literally no doors, not even any hinges. Most of the rooms had double bunk beds, and yeah, so most rooms had like at least two girls in them. There was one room that had one bed, and there was one girl who was like the sweetest angel in the universe, and she was so special, and they gave her that single room for like a short while during her stay there. And there was one room that had about 7 beds. I think 7 or 8 beds or something like that. It was the biggest room. I think they called it Big Room. That's giving me flashbacks. Big Room. Oh my god. I also remember going there, by the way, and thinking within my first couple weeks, like, I can't wait to get back out and commiserate with my sister about boarding schools, because one of the things that scapegoats experience is being shipped off to boarding schools because their parents don't know how to handle them. And my sister went through that as well. And she was like 4 years older than me. She was like 3 years and 9 months or 10 months older than me. So yeah, I was like, I can't wait to commiserate with her. She had all her own like health issues or whatever, and that she was going through at the time. And actually, when I was still in Queens before I was sent to Utah, and this Anubis drove from Miami to Florida, from Miami to New York, my mom was taking care of my sister while my sister was in the hospital, because she was having like anaphylactic shock and going through all this stuff, and she was in the hospital for 3 months. She couldn't keep down food. Her autoimmune diseases were like acting up. She lost a ton of weight. She was just really not doing well. She had Ehlers-Danlos and PANDAS. And anyway, without going too much more into that, like, that's kind of a snapshot background of my sister and who she was and my relationship with her. We got close really after I turned 16, and my brother and my sister and I all smoked weed together in my bedroom one time, and we all cried and we all bonded over our shared trauma of growing up. But before that we were always so isolated from one another. So anyway, I was in this facility, and so I remember I was sitting in the big room, like, making friends with one of the girls who lived there, and I was saying, like, I'm excited to, like, commiserate with my sister because she, has gone through this, or similar. And I honestly wonder, if the places she was sent to, if they were similar to where I was. And I imagine that they probably were in a lot of ways. But anyway, the privacy thing, no doors on the doorways. Every 15 minutes, every single night, whatever staff was on shift would shine a flashlight on every single girl in the room, every 15 minutes throughout every hour of the night. And if you got up in the middle of the night and you had to use the bathroom, you had to walk down the stairs, you had to announce that you were going down the stairs, and you had to ask for permission, because if you didn't, you were a threat. You get reported. You get privileges taken away. And when you went to the bathroom, you either had to, when you shut the door, once you were in the bathroom doing your business, you either had to count aloud. You either had to count aloud for as long as you were on the toilet, or literally as long as you were behind closed doors. I'm sorry, you had to count out loud, or if you didn't want to count out loud, you could be quiet behind closed doors, but you had to then show the staff whatever you left in the toilet. So we didn't even have privacy going to the bathroom. Imagine for a year of your life, every single time you need to go poop or pee or whatever it is, someone sees what you're doing, and someone is right outside the door, and you're accountable. You are accountable to exposing that part of yourself, that private part of your life. Like, the bathroom is a place that is supposed to be comfortable and private, and you turn off your mind and you just do your human business and then you leave. But that was robbed of us, and if we didn't do that, we would have to go with the door open. I've never seen that happen, but I'm sure that was the consequence, or some other form of abuse. You get restrained, you get your things taken away, you get whatever it was. Like, so I became, yeah, that was traumatizing. This is maybe TMI, but it's honest, and I was really pee shy because of that. When I would go to public bathrooms, and even when I would go in regular bathrooms, it would take me like 5 minutes sometimes to finally like release my bladder and like pee, because I was so so violated by that. And the reason that they did that was because some girls were there for, eating disorders, and they would make themselves throw up. And I never did that, and I wasn't sent there because of that. But even so, I was put through that. There was a girl there who I think made a joke about suicide, and she had to shower with the door and the curtain open. She did wear a bathing suit, but she didn't have any privacy. And because of that, she was in the large room, and I was in the large room as well. All of us had to sleep with the light on for I don't even know how long, until she like got better or some bullshit. So our sleep was disrupted. We also were forced to be in bed at 10 p.m. and to wake up every single morning at 6 a.m. That was not enough sleep for me. We had 15-minute showers we were allowed to take. I don't know why we didn't have to count out loud when we were taking showers, but we did when we were using the toilet. But every 5 minutes we would get a knock on the door, counting down how much time we had left. And, it just created this sense of anxiety. Hot shower is the one private place that I get to relax, but I couldn't really do that. Not completely, not fully. I think there was one time I took a bath because I was freezing or feeling sick or something. And, I was still kind of told to like get out after a certain amount of time, and it just, yeah. So there's the privacy thing. There was one moment where I was on the bunk bed, and I always woke up every single morning without causing any trouble. I was well behaved. I wasn't erratic. I was calm. I didn't fight. But one morning I had a migraine, and I just couldn't get up. I couldn't do it. And if you know me personally, you know about my history with migraines, headaches. I dealt with chronic migraines my whole life. And when I was a child, I couldn't go less than 3 days a week, most weeks, without having a headache or a migraine that prevented me from even going to school. Lots and lots and lots of trauma. Lots of trauma. Like, my entire childhood. It was just consistent. Like, everything. It just sucked. It was just... Other than my, like, caterpillar friends in the backyard and, like, my childhood friends, school and familial relationships and whatever. Just, yeah, there was too much consistent trauma. So anyway, I had my first migraine when I was there, my first migraine of living in Utah at that moment, and I couldn't do it. And this one like redhead, fiery, bitchy staff threatened to pour water on me and rip my mattress out and like basically caused me to fall out of the bed. And she threatened me. I'm in pain, and it's my fault. Basically, I'm a human and it's my fault. This is like a reoccurring theme that happens in abusive situations, and this was just another instance. I'm sick and I'm helpless, and no one's gonna take care of me. Yeah. Talking about this out loud is so crazy, and it's just like, wow, it's making me it's just, yeah, I haven't told this story in a long time, like all at once, and so like retelling this is just like, wow, that I really went through that, and sometimes I still feel those feelings. So another thing, with the no privacy thing, once a week we were allowed 15-minute phone calls to people who our therapist approved of. Or therapists approved of. There were 2 therapists there at any given point. And if you had a, entitled, unable to take accountability, emotionally volatile parent like I did at the time, who was paying God knows how much money to keep me there on a month-to-month basis. God. The therapist, would take their word over the child. So I was invisible. My relationships didn't matter. My point of view didn't matter. I didn't matter. I didn't matter. And because of that, my mom manipulated my therapist into preventing me from talking to my sister. Because my mom and my sister had a volatile relationship. But this part makes me really sad. It was so unfair. I was not allowed to talk to my sister because of my mom's own emotional projections and her lies, and my therapist's betrayal of even the idea of giving me her trust. I was like treated like somebody that I wasn't. I was treated like a criminal. I was treated like an untrustworthy person, like a dishonest person. Like if I talk to my sister, somehow my mom is threatened. Somehow, I don't know, like somehow it would be bad for us. So I wasn't allowed to talk to my sister on the phone. I was allowed to send her letters, but I honestly thought that was bullshit because I am not okay with the idea of like writing out my spontaneous feelings and like connecting with my sister through writing a letter and waiting weeks for a response. That's not connection. That's not communication by the standard that I deserved. I should have had. So I didn't write. I didn't send anything. It was too frustrating. It was too upsetting. And I don't mean to take for granted the fact that, writing letters is a fine way to communicate, but I think you understand the kind of what I'm saying. Like, I was not allowed to call my sister because my mom was somehow threatened by that for her own hang-ups, her own reasons, and that was held over me. And then given the state of my sister's health issues and everything, so I got there in March, and then in June she killed herself. And it was a week before she killed herself, that I knew, I knew that she was gonna die. I knew it. And I even told her on the phone, like, please don't die. There was one time that I got to talk to her on FaceTime after I got to the facility, and this was after a whole childhood of being distant with my sister and my brother. My brother kind of just like isolated himself, and he couldn't handle the stress and the chaos of the yelling and the fighting and the arguing. And my sister was a triple Aries. If you know anything about astrology, the most fiery motherfucker. And she was the most vibrant, incredible, bright, creative, absurd, funny soul. And I mean, I remember when I was a child, there was one time, I mean, even when we would fight as children, we would still play together, but she would just get in, she was very volatile, and she would like lash out and whatever, but we still played sometimes, but she would bully me a lot. But just need to take a second. So anyway, her and I were very, very distant, but there was one time when my mom actually pushed me onto the floor, and I was like 10 or 8 or something, and it was like hard kitchen tile floor, and she was like scary and yelled at me and everything, and I was devastated. I ran upstairs and I cried in my room, and I remember my sister speaking up for me then, and then her beautiful soul, and she knocked on my door and she tried to comfort me, and I pushed her away. But she did always have this fierce, loving, protective spirit about her. She was such an advocate for victims and underprivileged people. She worked at a place in New York City called The Door, and they provided free services for homeless youth, including counseling and schooling and art therapy and, food and career help, like all kinds of things, like sexual health things, doctor visits, like all kinds of things. And she was so bold. And there was one year at her work party, they had a drug themed Halloween party, so she made a hood out of felt for herself, and it was a cactus with a little flower, and then she had a name tag that said, "Hello, my name is," and she wrote peyote, and that was what her cute self came up with for this drug themed Halloween party. So that was kind of who she was. She was a blazingly bright soul, don't get too close, like stand back and absorb the warmth and radiant beauty and light, but you get too close and you're gonna like disintegrate in 2 seconds. So I wasn't allowed to talk to her, and then leading up to her suicide, I felt it. But as I was saying, there was one time that I was allowed to FaceTime her, and it was like a week or two after I arrived in Utah, and she was like in a wheelchair and crutches, and she had some degenerative tissue diseases, so her feet were like, her ankles were like melted, and her cartilage and bone were like, I don't even know, they were like dissolving or whatever, and she had Tourette's, and she like had these tics where she would bang her heels on the ground, and she caused herself nerve damage and broken bones or whatever. She was just like, she went through more than anyone should have to go through, plus so many things I didn't even mention. But anyway, that was the one time I got to speak to her. But then in June she killed herself, and I found out when I was in the school building, which was basically like this like big like office space thing. There was like a living room with like carpet and like a dining room table area and the front desk, and then the therapy offices, and then the 2 different classrooms. And it was like one insular building. Like we didn't really go in society, like unless we were like going to a park together or like going to get like shaved ice or whatever. Like we did these outings from time to time. So anyway, I was called into the therapy office, and my mom told me that my sister killed herself, and it shattered me. And I think it was like later that day or the next day, I was like put on a plane or something. I don't know my family went to Zion National Park, and we sat Shiva, which is a Jewish tradition that you do and it's like a morning tradition. And yeah, we sat Shiva at this hotel at Zion National Park, and I got to see Zion at the very least. But after a week of grieving and also being in the presence of like my mom who gave me CPTSD, I was sent back to Utah, and I had a week to grieve until I was thrown back into prison. So that happened. Yeah. Jumping to something different, with the lockdown in prison institution kind of vibe, like one thing that they would do regularly was like a shakedown. So we would all have to go out of our rooms, and they would, literally strip our beds apart and shake them out in front of us and go in our drawers and go through every single one of our belongings, to make sure that we weren't like hiding anything somehow. So yeah, everything. It's like, even if I wanted to keep a secret little piece of paper in my pillowcase for whatever reason, I'm just making something up. Like, the only thing that was private was my journal, and thank God that, they weren't allowed to read it. Oh, and you know what? I'm remembering something else. So with the shakedown thing, and I'll get to that, the art supplies, my art journal. So, I'm an artist, and I had my mom send me or mail me my art supplies, my sketchbook, my pens, and I actually drew. Oh my God, here we go. This is the sketchbook that I drew out of when I lived in Utah. And let me show you my most popular piece of art is something that I created when I was in Utah. Well, here's one. So, I spent hours just by myself, like, doing these hyper detailed things. And by the way, if you want to see more of my art, check the description of this video and go to my website, AleaTamar.com. I also have my Instagram over there. This I did in November at the facility. This one I did in October of 2015. This was infused with my time at Utah. It was like a sabbatical. I actually got to cultivate a lot of my creative skills then. I was really excited to go visit Florida and go to the Fruit and Spice Park. I don't know why it's registering that there's a thumbs down in there somewhere, but I think that the technology spirits are empathizing with how thumbs down of a time in my life this was. So thank you, technology gods. This is my most famous piece, and I did this in Utah in August of 2015. And there's a little guy there under the mushroom in the middle, and it's kind of like, how I found solace when I was there. A lot of people ask, or I've been asked before, how did you survive? My internal universe is so rich and beautiful, and I have lots of tools to connect with it. And art has always been one of those tools. And this is my angel Butter, who I actually had while I was in Utah. She's been with me for 15.5 years. So yeah, the shakedown thing, no privacy, routine shakedowns. When my mom sent my art supplies, they were kept in a private drawer away from me, which made me feel uneasy because I didn't have any control. And I was afraid that they would like mishandle my supplies, or maybe someone would mistake them for like not mine, and I like really try to just like keep an eye on them and just make sure like they're in their right place, right? Like no one's touching them, no one's using them, like I made it known. I'm pretty sure I did, and I just, because my art supplies were like somewhat of a lifeline for me. And there was another sketchbook I had, and I had some drawings in there. So, a little background information. I'm one of the most anti-drug, drug-free, substance-free people that most people in my life know. And I did mention that I smoked weed with my siblings. I smoked it for a year for anxiety, depression, and migraines, and it helped. And then I stopped after a year, and I only took a handful of puffs throughout the years, and each time I did it, it was progressively more anxiety and paranoia inducing. It was pretty terrible. And my girl deserves to be acknowledged because she is literally an angel. And she is so unconditionally loving and so sensitive and so supportive and wonderful, and you see how just perfect her presence is, and she's just here showing up and bringing her love, and I need to just acknowledge that out loud. She's the love of my life. She is so, yeah, she's so here. She feels me, she's here for me, and she knows it, you know? It's funny because I'm kind of sad because like there were points when as I was telling the story that she started twitching, you know, when animals twitch in their sleep. So she picks up on that energy. And her and I have a very psychic connection, and she is just taking care of me big time right now because she feels my tender heart, and she is showing up for me and being extremely soft and being available, and I appreciate that so much. And you know, again on the topic of like how did you survive, how did you heal? Animals are safe places to be vulnerable and to unfurl in front of. And oh my gosh, so if someone that you love was a victim of abuse and you want to do something for them to help them heal, like, you know, let them go hang out with horses, put them on a horse and let them go for a trail ride, or, you know, bring them to a shelter where they can just like pet cats for an hour or whatever. Like animals, they're such exquisite, sensitive, open, boundless souls, and they are so healing because they provide, you know, embodied presence for people who, you know, don't often find the depth or the presence that they actually need from other people, especially if they've gone through things that most people don't even know how to address or how to be present with. So animals, that's a huge one for me. So anyway, going back to my art supplies that were shipped to me, my therapist kind of humiliated me because she went through my private art book. Because it was something sent to me from the outside, she had to like check it to make sure that it was, you know, appropriate. And I had drawings about psychedelics in there because when I was 16, I was extremely intrigued by them to the point where I would have dreams that I was tripping. I was so fascinated by them, but I'd never done them at that point. I've had a handful of psychedelic experiences, and I will say that none of them are significant to me in any way whatsoever, other than the fact that they are a testament to how ineffective they are for me and how much more powerful meditation and spiritual discipline practices are for me. And I do honor and respect the medicinal affectivity of psychedelic substances, plants. People that I love have used them and been able to heal from them. And so I respect that. But again, like the one thing that did provide me tremendous healing was meditation and somatic embodiment and things like this. So anyway, she was going through my sketchbook, and I have this like image burned into my mind of her holding up a page in my sketchbook about the psychedelics, and she was looking at me like, she was giving me this expression like, are you serious? And like, yeah, honestly, therapist, you can go fuck yourself in that moment, because this is a private, personal sanctuary of self-expression, and it's supposed to be my safe little place to pour the things that are coming through me out onto paper, not to be held against me, not to be used to humiliate me or to judge me. So that pissed me off. I think that was honestly a fucked up way to approach me. Okay? Like, I don't know about anybody else, but it just doesn't sit right with me. I am too sensitive for that. And just, again, like, given the weight of, like, how violated I had felt in so many different ways, like, it was just another little thing. Like, those little things just feels, like, so unbearable when you've already been through so much, and that was my case. So, that was that. The abuse part. Okay, so one other thing that happened in this facility, you know, when it came to like the punishments and stuff that they would do to us, is if we like were particularly rebellious, we okay, it's the peace sign. Okay, I've been trying to figure that out because that's happened a lot of times. But yeah, if we were particularly rebellious, which, you know, this never happened to me, but some people would get put on what's called ghost status, where they were forced to, I think, not make eye contact with anyone or not talk to anyone. And listen here. Years later, I went off to take a Vipassana course, and part of the discipline was not making eye contact and not talking to anybody. But the context was different. We were going there voluntarily to kind of reset our minds and our psyches, and to sit with, you know, ourselves in a very deep, spiritually confrontational kind of way. Okay, but when you're a child in a prison and you are forced to stop talking and stop making eye contact with other people because you are expressing yourself emotionally, that's abuse. I did already mention the unfair standards with food and exercise. There was no real nutritionist. We were threatened to be restrained. There was some staff that would gossip about certain people who lived in the house, and I would stick up for them. Because I'm like, you little asshole, like, you are supposed to be a leader. You are supposed to be the example. It is not cool for you to be talking behind the backs of the kids that you're supposed to be taking care of. I don't care if they piss you off. I don't care if they bother you. You are here to serve them. You are here to help them. They're the ones suffering. They're the ones in trouble. They're the ones that need the care and that need the support, the compassion, the empathy. You do not have any right to talk about these kids behind their backs. And I felt isolated in that, because sometimes I was the only one who did the right thing. I felt. I'm not saying that other you know, kids in there didn't do good or right things, but when it came to the gossiping situation, or, you know, when certain people had very little tolerance for mental and emotional ailments that they couldn't understand or deal with, or that upset them, it's like their own selfish, limited perspective prevented them from providing the compassion and the care that these poor victims needed. And there was one girl who she like has a permanent like throne in my heart. Like, this girl that I lived with there, she was, a lot of the time, she was bullied, she was talked about, I don't know if she cared that much, but she was so outgoing, and she was also kind of crazy, not in a bad way, but in a way that was just, I could feel and I could see how much, you know, kind of pent up emotional energy that she was living with on a day-to-day basis. And because they saw how, understanding I was with her, they made me her roommate. And when they did that, everyone in the house noticed a shift in her, and they said, this was the best decision we ever made. I felt so proud. I felt so honored. I felt so happy that I was able to be there for this girl. Sometimes at night she would like climb on the bed and jump on me and like cuddle with me, and I didn't really do anything, and I just let her do it, and I felt so much love for her. And of course when the staff came around, they would be like, hey, get off of her. And I was like, I didn't want her to not get off of me. I didn't want her to get off of me. I wanted to, let her express herself. And I felt honored that she felt comfortable enough with me to cuddle me and jump on me and play with me or whatever. And yeah, I mean, sometimes she would just like open up and break down crying, this 12, 13-year-old girl, like about how suicidal she was and how much pain she was. And I'm like, yeah, it was rough for her. And she wasn't always treated fairly. And that's one thing that ticked me off. The staff that were hired to supposedly support these girls, like when it came down to it, and this girl who needed them most out of anybody probably, for her to be like talked about behind her back, or for people to crack jokes, that shit pissed me off so much, and I made it known. So yeah, I talked about the sleep thing. We didn't have any rest. Yeah, being forced to go to bed at 10 p.m. and not having any peace until then, and not even being allowed to take naps in the day, and then waking up at 6 a.m. every day, how stressful that was. Another thing, so my therapist, moving on to that, so she actually created unnecessary burdens for me in a couple of ways. One of the things she did was she told me a secret about one of the other girls who was living there. She said, this girl that I'm talking to you about, Aaliyah, is going to leave the house. She thinks she's going home, but she's actually going to another institution, but don't tell her. As if to send this message to manipulate me, you are such a well-behaved girl, Aaliyah, and I trust you, so I'm going to release my burden and hand it to you and make it your burden, even though you are already a victim of trafficking, and your sister killed herself, and your mom is toxic, and all this shit. I'm gonna give you another little burden. It's not that big of a deal, right? You can handle it. It's fine. And I feel like telling you a secret that you shouldn't tell anyone else, so I'm gonna give it to you. And listen, I have no idea what her intention was, but from my perspective, I'm like, what the fuck? I lived that. I was put in that position. I was put in the position where I was carrying so much already that even if she thought this was some innocent thing, it's it's so inappropriate, and it's a breach of personal privacy and whatever. And she also told me another secret about another girl who was gonna go, on a home visit, and I wasn't allowed to say anything. But my therapist knew, and I was trustworthy and well-behaved, so she told me. But I couldn't say anything, and I couldn't tell anyone else. I had to keep this secret in, along with the other things that I was holding in. All the toxicity, all the whatever, all the shit that I put up with. So much was put on my shoulders. Another thing I think I mentioned earlier in this video was how, and I guess this video is long after all, but at least I'm, already talking about all these points, and I feel like it's been pretty thorough, but pretty good, and pretty, I don't know, it's a long story, so I hope you're enjoying, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so another thing she told me, which like I said, I think I mentioned this before, was, the guy who almost trafficked me, there was something that came up in the news that my mom saw, and basically what happened was, I would recommend fast forwarding another 3 minutes if you're sensitive to violence, graphic things. It's not that graphic, but it's violent and it's sad, and trigger warning, death. So my mom saw in the news or something that on a specific street in Queens or Brooklyn, like one of the boroughs in New York City. There was a car driving 80 miles an hour down a residential street, down the street where one of Anubis's relatives lived. And outside their house, there was, I forget whether it was the man that was driving the car or a man that the car hit, but the car hit a man and killed the man, and the man was like an 80-year-old something man, and he died. And either the man who died or the man who was driving the car had the same family name as Anubis's like relatives. And all this stuff was kind of pieced together through the private investigation. So, stupidly, my mom and my therapist, for some far out reason, thought that it was okay to tell me about that. And not only to tell me about that, 7 months in, to tell me about this, but to then tell me that I have the power to save girls from that. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Let me just try to break this down for a second. My mother and my therapist told me that my predator is related to someone who murdered somebody. They have a whole trafficking ring. They got away with this crime. There is death involved. And you're telling me that because I was almost trafficked by this guy, that I should call the FBI and report these people, the same people who pretended to work for the New York City Police Department, the same people who are committing dirty, dark, devilish crimes, the same people who are murderers, the same people who are trafficking people, the same people who are lying amongst a network of blood relatives and getting away with these things. You are telling me, a 17-year-old girl, a healing patient, that I should save other girls' lives and protect them against these people who displayed that they can obviously evade legal conviction. Is that not one of the most obscene things that you've ever heard? This family is a family that had been running from the police. I didn't get into the story of the all the details about the trafficking, and I'll share that at some point, but they were shady criminals and they were good at it. They were good at it. Given how many connections that were made directly between either the cops being called on them or the private investigation or me trying to call the cops. Fast forward a couple years later when I actually saw him and his family at an event dedicated to celebrating femininity, believe it or not. I tried calling the private investigators. I tried calling the police. I even told the people running the event that this man was here, that man was in their, on their property, on their space. They got emotional. They got all, oh my God, I'm so sorry you went through that. What should we do? They asked me, what should we do? So I'm sure that by this point you are starting to get a picture of how I was a victim of perpetual abuse, and consistently I was the one to either comfort people or be the one to stick my neck out and speak up about it. Like I had to always be the one to feel bad for someone or to, be compassionate or understand that this was happening because these people are idiots. And it's like, still, no one's here protecting me. No one's here serving me justice. Like I'm just going through all of this by myself. And that's part of the reason that I'm making this video right now, because I cannot be the only person going through this, and send my heart and soul to anyone who is being victimized and who is not, no one's standing up for them. I want to stand up for people. So I'm standing up right now and making this video. Okay, yeah, so she told me about this stupid, she literally suggested like calling the FBI or calling the cops, and I was like, I kind of think that's hopeless, and I'm actually scared to do that. And I even tried afterwards, but nothing really came of it. And you know what? I will say, no matter whether it's the fucking legal system, your local county police, or some random person, no matter who it is, do not stop telling your story. If you can muster up the courage, if you can be physically safe, if you are able to tell your story, shout it from the rooftops, because, like I said, I don't care if you're talking to a county police officer who tells you he can't do anything or she can't do anything about helping you. Get it out there. Be loud about it, because we need people to step up. We need people to advocate for victims of abuse. When the FBI doesn't have enough evidence to cut things in the throat, like what I was going through, to pick this man up off the streets and put him in a cell for the rest of his life, he's the one who deserved to be in prison, not me. So where are the people, you know, doing justice for that? I know that there are like organizations and stuff who do this advocacy for, you know, trafficking and, you know, troubled teen industries or whatever, but it's like, my story is a powerful one. And I think it's absurd how still to this day I feel like, where are the people reaching out to me? Where's the support? Like, there's a part of me that's like, where are the people to advocate for me? Where are the people to help me? And this is making this video is one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do. Going through the shit was really hard, but talking about it in a world where have felt so historically invisible and unsupported, that's really hard. And my goal, my hope is to connect with advocates who are trying to make a difference and to be a part of that, because there's just too much of this already, and there's other people who went through these things and they're still holding them by themselves, and it's not okay. So anyway, with that aside, let me see what else. Yeah, we had no connection to the outside world. There was one girl there who received special treatment, and she was allowed to play on the county school's like basketball team or something, and it was unfair. And also, like, if you went to Mormon church, like, you were allowed to leave the house to go to church, and I think that people who went were like rewarded for going to church. That's what I heard. I didn't hear that personally, but I spoke to a girl who I lived in the facility with just 2 days ago, actually, and she told me that one thing that she was told by the people who went to church was that they went because they thought that it would, or they were being praised for going to church. So there was like some religious persuasion there as well, supposedly, which I have no doubts in, given that, like, I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, our conversations were monitored or controlled. We had to ask permission to enter and exit rooms. We couldn't be alone anywhere. Yeah, the school was humiliating, low-level work for me, unfair, unequal standards everywhere with the dress code. Oh, there was one girl who, graduated school before the rest of us, and there was talk about her being able to, like, work and make money. And even just that conversation, like, it seemed for a while like it was going to be a real thing, and it was like just the feeling of a peer being able to have a privilege or an advantage or some boost over the rest of us. It didn't feel fair. You know, because we were all trapped. We were all in a prison. So seeing any semblance of freedom that any of the other girls had, or any of the other people, I should say, because there was one trans kid who was made invisible and denied his identity, which pissed me off and a bunch of other people. So I say people, you know, it was a girls' school, but there was a trans kid who lived there. So yeah. What else? I mean, going in public was humiliated sometimes because some of the kids would just say the stupidest shit in public just for attention. And I remember we went to like a Taco Bell one time as an outing. We literally went to Taco Bell as an outing. And I like removed myself from the table where they were like saying a bunch of embarrassing shit because I didn't want to be socially humiliated. But the thing was, it didn't matter where we went. I like walked with so much shame where I went because I was seen in the context of this group of people who were, you know, rampantly misbehaved at times in public. And so that was embarrassing. It was embarrassing to like walk in the world and like see actually people that I would have admired, like that I admired and I would have wanted to talk to or like connect with. But there was this barrier, this isolating barrier that like robbed me from having any kind of social support system outside of this prison, which is another sign of, you know, being in a cult. They cut you off from your support system. It's just you and everyone who lives there. What else? So there was also insurance fraud and more manipulation. So there's a point where like we had to take pee tests, like drug tests, like urine drug tests, 3 times a week. And the reason was to test for drugs. So even the kids who were sent there without any substance abuse problems, like me, were forced to pee in a cup. And you may be asking, well, how were you forced? Well, I wasn't exactly forced, but I was threatened. And what would happen if I didn't pee in that cup myself was that I would be pinned down and have a catheter put up my urethra. If I didn't voluntarily pee in a cup, I would have been medically raped. So I think peeing in a cup was a better choice for me. But it was insurance fraud, and because they had no reason to do that, and they were stealing money, I was not the only person that they did this to. They did this to a bunch of people, and I'm pretty sure if you go to breakingcodesilence.org or .com, look up Havenwood Academy, and you will find things about the insurance fraud. You will also find something about the equine therapist who, I believe, tied a girl up and put her in a horse water trough as a form of humiliation. And that's the last thing I have to say. That's the last thing on my list. I did mention throughout this video some of the things that helped me survive and, like, you know, begin to, like, flourish afterwards. I deal with a bit of eczema, so I apologize if my scratching is distracting, but yeah, that's what that's about. But anyway, so like I mentioned, when I was in the institution, I turned to my art. I have always had a very deep connection to my inner world, and my intuition and my creativity, so I always had outlets for that. So that was a big thing that I did to help me survive when I was in Utah, and I maintained a sense of peace, like, throughout the whole thing. Yeah, I also, when I left there, I mentioned meditation. Learning meditation is life-changing, and I would recommend it to everyone. I also, through the Art of Living organization, I learned something called Sudarshan Kriya, which I believe it's called Sky Breathing now, but it used to be called the Happiness Program. But they teach you this breath work that helps. It's an extremely gentle but massively effective way to release trauma. And people who suffer from PTSD, CPTSD, trauma, nightmares, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things, war veterans, the Kriya, this breathwork practice, has a tremendously positive impact on them. It also helps the immune system. It helps heal ailments and cancer and all kinds of things. It's incredible. The breath stores, I believe, 80% of toxins, or the lungs do, or there's something about 80% of toxins being released through the breath. And so doing this gentle breath work that is rooted in an ancient lineage and tradition, there's something about that is very, very powerful and effective in the long term. I still do it to this day. I took a break for a couple years on and off, but I've been doing it every day for a long time now. Having community is essential. We are social, interdependent creatures, and we need empathy, we need validation, we need co-regulation, we need to share joy, we need to share happiness, we need to share vulnerability, we need safety, emotional safety, physical safety, and lots of those things are found through community. So, find things that you are interested in, find things that you value, and go to events or workshops or retreats focused around those things, and do not give up until you find connections, and do not be afraid to walk alone if being in the company of certain people makes you feel more alone or makes you feel worse than when you're actually physically by yourself. That just means that, the way I put it, like, God has much better for you in store, and you just have to have faith and be patient and not give up and let yourself rest. Be kind to yourself and trust your internal compass, which brings me to another thing that has helped me heal tremendously, that I'm passionate about teaching, actually. And you can find resources if you want support directly from me. I have options to offer that in the description of this video, but another main thing that helped me heal was developing my own intuition. Why is that? Because as a survivor of psychological abuse and being dehumanized, especially as a child, as like a young adolescent, my sense of self was deeply entangled with my abusers and with the ways that they treated me. So my discernment was affected, my judgment was affected. All these things were very entangled and very difficult to parse apart from who I truly am, what my identity is, who I am at my core, and, and what's happening on the outside. So what I've found in my experience is that as I learned to cultivate my intuition and rely on it, and I actually started practicing psychic abilities, I learned that I could trust myself. And, even if I couldn't trust my own mind, I could trust my intuition, or as I also like to refer to it, God. Because, when you imagine being in a position where, you are so beaten down by the world that you start to believe bad things about yourself, untrue things about yourself, falsehoods about yourself, but you learn to cultivate your psychic abilities and you practice with certain techniques, which I have so much to share on that. But you do that and you find that, like, oh my gosh, like, I am getting better at guessing what people are thinking, or I'm getting better at seeing images from behind closed eyes, or I'm getting better at my psychic perceptions about these people, or I'm getting better at doing intuitive readings or whatever. Like, these were all my experiences. So the more I cultivated my intuition, the more I learned that I could lean on it. The more I learned that was the truth, because I didn't need any sensory input on the outside of me to validate what I was perceiving. So I learned to follow that voice. I learned to trust it, and now it leads the way. God / my intuition is at the forefront. It's in the driver's seat of my life. and I have a very, very deep trust in God and my intuition. So learning to cultivate that, cultivate your faith, that's something that helped me not only survive, but to flourish afterwards and to find like a beautiful sense of peace and joy and inner cohesion and harmony. Faith, faith, faith. Lastly, somatic-based therapy is my top recommendation for healing from institutionalized abuse or from any kind of abuse. The thing about somatic therapies is that it addresses the root of the trauma instead of talking about the symptoms and the feelings and looping on the mind over and over. I'm going to illustrate something for you. When we cry, tears of joy, tears of sadness, if you look at those tears under a microscope, the crystalline structure of the tears cried during a moment of joy are molecularly different. They're shaped differently than the tears cried during, a sad moment. What does that tell us? It tells us that our emotions are chemicals that are produced in our brains. They're created up here and they're pumped through our bodies as responses to certain stimuli. And especially if we have, CPTSD, like any random thing, any unpredictable thing could trigger us and send us into a flood of emotional overwhelm. So it's especially important for survivors of, trauma who deal with, PTSD, CPTSD, that they are able to address the psychosomatic roots of their ailments. And there are countless practices like breath work, like meditation, like dancing, like physical exercise, and also maintaining a clean, balanced diet that helps the physical body flush those crystalline chemical emotional structures that are created and released in the brain into our bodies. Doing those somatic practices that I just named helps our physical bodies eliminate those toxins, because if we don't, they will calcify in our bodies, and they create tension, pain, sickness, illness, and I actually have lots of health issues that I deal with because they are kind of manifestations of these traumas. And the shit that I've been through is, you heard a good chunk of it, but it's not everything that I've been through. There's more. And so there's only so much that I can process at once. So my favorite methods are slow, gentle, holistic approaches. I don't like to go too fast into any of these things because I don't want to overwhelm my nervous system. I have been in situations like that before, doing, random breathwork ceremonies, the ones that aren't rooted in an ancient lineage or tradition were a bit too ungrounding for me personally because of how sensitive I am and because of how often sensorially overloaded that I get. So, and I've been able to heal some of these longer term health issues through techniques like the ones I named, like meditation, community, breathwork, all that stuff's like my number one, and also animals again. So, honestly, that's it. That's kind of the story of the time I was almost trafficked and then sent to a troubled teen industry, and also what helped me overcome it. So again, check out the description of this video if you want to reach out for personal support. I'm going to do my best to continually add resources over time for like survivors or whatever. I'm not closely connected with anything in particular, any organizations in particular, but as I find more, I will continually update this description. I hope this video pops off and gets passed around to the people who need to hear it. Tell your story, share my story. Don't be afraid to call abusers out. Do it loudly, do it proudly, do it safely. I wish I could share more resources on how to do that safely. First, you gotta get yourself into a safe position, a safe place, because, if your freedom, your power is being held against you, then, that's not safe. So, and like I said, I'll share resources that I find to help people. I want to help people who are going through this. And I, at the very, very least, I send my love, I send my blessings to anyone who needs it, anyone who's suffering. May they be free, may they be protected, may they be advocated for, may the abuse come to an end, may it be shed a light on. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching.